Thank you for watching this video. We can start by creating a new tube. I'm going to make an Eppendorf tube which contains 500 microliters of bromophenol blue. And you can see that it's nice and blue coloured. I can close the lid by right clicking on the lid. Basically right clicking on the lid will open and close it. To move the tube, we just hold our mouse on the bottom of the tube and drag it along. I'm going to create another tube which is a bigger test tube, but this time with 10 mils of water. So that's 10,000 microliters of water. And again, we move the tube by just dragging on the bottom. The lid on this case is already off. To close that menu, we just click on the icon again. So clicking and on the icons will normally pop up a menu and close them again. Now we're going to pipette this water and this bromophenol blue into some new Eppendorf tubes, but rather than making those Eppendorf tubes by one at a time via this menu, let's create a rack of tubes. Now when we create a rack, we determine the number of rows and columns we want in the rack. So I'm going to go for a 6 tube rack. I'm going to make it 6 columns and 1 row, and I'm going to make 6 tubes to go in there, and that's my rack. And this time the tubes are aligned, they're bound, they're grouped to the rack. I can delete the rack if I like by pressing on this icon, this little button here, but I'm not going to, and instead I'm going to pipette some solutions into these tubes. The first solution I'm going to pipette in is the water, and for that I'm going to activate one of my pipettes along the bottom here. So you can see there are 4 different types of pipette, P5000 down to P20. I'm going to use a P5000 and I'm going to generate a new tip. That tip appears in the interface. To move it, we don't drag it like we did the tubes, we click on the tube that we want it to go to. And we click on a very specific place. We click on the collar of the tube. So notice how when I click on the collar of the tube, the tip goes to that tube. And it actually goes to the meniscus of the liquid in the tube. To suck up, I press the Y key, and to expel, I press the H key. So Y and H are my sucking up and putting out controls. Now I put 1 mil into the first tube. I'm going to put a little bit less into the next tube. I'm going to put 0.98 mils in because I'm actually going to put 20 microliters of bromophenol blue in there later on. So 980 microliters in there, 960 microliters in the next one, 940 microliters in the next one, 920 in this one, and you've guessed it, 900 in the final one. Actually, it'd be helpful if I actually picked up the volume, wouldn't it? So 900 in that bottom one. Now I'm going to make a new pipette. Now once I click on a new pipette, the original tip from the other pipette will disappear, and I can make a new tip for my P200. Now if I was to try and click on to direct the tip to this bromophenol blue here, it's not going to work because the lid is closed, so I actually have to open the lid to do this. And I'm going to put 100 microliters into this tube. I'm going to put 80 microliters into this one. I'm going to put 60 microliters into this one, 40 microliters into this one, and I think for the last one I'll actually use a P20 because it's slightly more accurate to use a P20 than a P200 for that addition. Now in addition to clicking on one of the other pipettes to get rid of the current pipette tip, you can also click the X. That will get rid of it as well. So let's now mix these tubes, because the problem is if we were to sample from these tubes, although they look nice and well mixed. In fact, they're not. And to mix them, we need to close the lids, and then we need to select the tubes, and we select them by clicking on this little tab here, and then we press M, and that will mix the tubes. Now I deselect the tubes, they're nicely mixed, and now I open the lids again, because now we're going to pipette the contents of those tubes into a plate. Now currently the only plate we can make is a 24 well plate. It's very easy to make a plate of any custom size, but for the moment we're just keeping it at 24, and that plate appears, and we're now going to pipette things from these tubes into the wells in the plate. Now if I create myself a P200 and I put 200 microliters of each of these solutions in there, it is actually quite tricky to find the right well. I did it there okay, but just to aid that process we can actually tilt the camera, and now you can see things are going to be a lot easier. So now when I click in here and pull up the solution, it's very easy to see what I'm doing. So just pipetting those solutions into the wells, and there we have everything dispensed. So now if we want to read that plate, we can click on the plate reader. And the idea here is that the plate reader will measure the absorbance of each of the wells. But in future, of course, we'll make it so that you can copy and paste this information into an Excel spreadsheet. Now, one final thing to note is that there is another menu on the bottom left-hand side which enables you to do some quite interesting things. A key thing is the ability to be able to have a look at the contents of the tube. So at the moment you can't see what's in there, you just have to rely on your memory and the cues that you're getting from the colours, but in fact you can click on this and see what is exactly in each of those tubes, what volume and concentration there is in each tube, and also whether the tube is mixed or not. So these tubes here with the M on have been mixed. The camera panning, which uses the up and down arrow buttons, or the left and right arrow buttons, or the scroll to zoom in and out, that can be enabled or disabled. The pipette volume that's going to be dispensed is shown in the dial on each of the pipetters, but we can turn that off, and that's useful if we're trying to help students understand how the dial settings relate to the pipette final volume delivered. So we can turn that on and off by clicking on that button. The rack labels as well can be turned on and off. It's a bit less important, but it's just an example of how things could be turned on and off as well. Now,